Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar titled Dialogue with Anthem, How Hassles of Claims Denial Management Are Reducing Through the Core Code Combinations. My name is Jessica Porras, and I'm the Senior Manager for Education and Outreach at CAQH Core. Today you will hear in a presentation or the Q&A fashion about the system improvements and data governance changes Anthem has executed to take full advantage of the efficiencies being brought about by the CAQH Core 360 rule and the core code combinations. Before we begin our session, I would like to mention a few logistical items. You can download a copy of today's presentation from the CAQH.org website. To do so, please navigate to the core pull-down menu at the top of the CAQH.org welcome screen and select the Core Education Events page. A link to the PDF version of the presentation can be found under the listing for today's webinar. We will save time at the end of today's program to respond to your questions. You're encouraged to submit your questions at any time during this webinar by typing them into the questions panel of your dashboard. We would like to thank our guest speakers from Anthem for joining us today. We will properly introduce them a little bit later in the program, but we would like to extend our appreciation to Meg Cutts and Scott Munich. Today, we will start off with two presentations from core staff about how the CAQH core code combination maintenance process and specific examples of how changes in the code combinations have real-world effects. Then, our speakers from Anthem will walk us through how Anthem has optimized their denial management process by developing new and improved corporate data governance and other system improvements. After that, we will talk to our guest speakers to gain more insights and tips on how to reduce claim denial hassles in order to get the most benefit from the core code combinations. And now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, CAQH Core Associate Director, Robert Bowman. Bob?
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And as you can see on the next slide, really the focus of the webinar, aside from the processes that have been implemented to improve denial maintenance, really focuses on three different code sets: the CAQH, RARCs, and group codes, or the claim adjustment reason codes, the remittance advice remark codes, and the claim adjustment group codes. These three different code sets are used by health plans to relate information back to the provider on how that plan adjudicated the claim, the denial or the adjustment that's particular to that claim line or that claim itself. And the CAQH Core has a maintenance process that we've developed to ensure that not only are our code combinations in compliance with the latest edition of the code sets, but also make sure that they're driving towards the business needs and requirements of the industry as well. On the next slide, you'll see that, why do we have to have this code maintenance process in place? Well, the industry determined that there really needed to be a set of operating rules around this process because it's been very confusing for providers to make sure what the use of these codes actually are. Providers don't necessarily receive the same uniform, consistent set of codes from every health plan. If the provider is billing, on average 8 to 12 different health plans, and every health plan can interpret and use these codes any way that they wish, and the providers are kind of at the back end of that process and have to really work with the variety of responses and messages back to them from each of those individual health plans. And not only that, there are also hundreds of different CAQH and RARC codes, and in combinations, there's tens of thousands of potential code combinations. So providers have to understand and know each one of those specific payers that they're billing, when they get that information back, is very unique. Unfortunately, when in fact billing claims is usually pretty a process for, I guess, when they're billing a particular service for a member, that is replicated over many, many members, over many, many claims. But the information coming back from the health plans is variable. Decisions on the CAQH and RARCs used to explain, again, being left completely up to the health plans, it really lends itself to a really high level of subjectivity, and it's really an interpretive process, again, with the impact to the provider. Another important component is that the code combinations are updated 3 times per year. code sets are updated 3 times per year, and this led many plans and providers to using outdated codes that are no longer used by health plans, or health plans are using outdated codes. It kind of goes both ways there. So it led to a lot of different issues that many times were really left at the doorstep of a provider to deal with. So kind of looking back, we have a nice visual for you on the next slide, kind of showing the confusion or the problems that providers face. So initially, the provider would provide care, and then they would remit the claim to the health plan. The plan would review the claim and send back the particular denial for the line or for the claim itself, and provide information back in the CAQH and WARCs and group codes on exactly what the issue was. Again, with there not being a consistent set of information that each individual health plan can return to the provider, it led to lots of confusion. Again, if every claim that is submitted has a different type of response on it, but it's the exact same claim just for different members, because they may be billing a Cigna, Humana, an Aetna, or a Blues plan, and each of those plans is sending back just a little bit different, a little variation. The provider has to figure out what those variations are. So post the core code combination process, what we're really looking for is to improve that denial management process. And we really want to help mitigate unnecessary manual follow-up. We want to mitigate faulty electronic secondary billing. Again, if the messaging is incorrect or confusing for the provider may take actions that are inappropriate. They may also have write-offs for billable charges that are inappropriate or incorrect, again, because the messaging is confusing. There could be incorrect billing of patients for their co-pays or their deductibles or their co-insurance. And obviously, this all leads to posting delays. And that posting delay can really have a negative impact on a provider's AR. So we want to make sure that we can have very demonstrable improvements in that process. We want to have staff spending less time on the phone or on the website to ensure that we get greater automation in the process of auto-posting both the remittance advice and the EFT payment information. We want to increase the ability to conduct follow-up with health plans to make sure that they know exactly what to do. The providers putting in those workflow processes, they know exactly what to do and how to contact and what website to click on at the health plan to make sure they get the information most expeditiously. And they want to make sure that they have the most accurate and efficient payment of the claims that they can get. Again, all very important processes for the provider as they move towards adopting that 835 and hopefully the EFT as well. So after the code combinations, we really want to see, like in the next animation for you, when the provider provides the care and bills the claim to the payer again, will adjudicate that claim according to their own proprietary requirements, send the denial to the provider. The provider now has a much clearer understanding of what exactly that CAQH and group code combination is because of a specific set of business scenarios that have been defined by CORE and are maintained by CORE. And these will help drive, and we took that approach of 80-20. These are between these 4 business scenarios, this could cause 80% of the problems for providers. So by having a very distinct set of business scenarios and a maximum set of codes within each, this allows the provider to set up better business processes and business process flows on their side to handle those issues that come up on a regular basis from a specific set of plans that they bill. So it allows them to actually rebill the claim and get a clean claim to be processed and passed through. With that, I'm going to hand the call over to Omni Adekambi, our project manager, who will walk through exactly what those business scenarios are and some examples for each. Omni?
Thanks, Bob. So the slide on slide 11 identifies the 4 core-defined business scenarios that the core code combinations address. These scenarios were identified as they target 80% of industry usage problems with the code with CAQH and WARCs. So ideally, using these business scenarios really helps to get at most of the pain points that both plans and providers had around the CAQH and WARCs. 2 of our scenarios address missing and incomplete or invalid information. So we have one around the documentation with the claim. So for example, for claim attachments or missing lab results, etc., as well as business scenario number 2, the actual data within the submitted claim. The third business scenario identifies situations in which the service that was billed is not covered by the health plan. As you can see from the number of code combinations, that's really our largest business scenario there with over 800 code combinations included. And the final service scenario identifies services that are not separately payable, so the billing for that service is tied into another service that was already billed. On slide 12, the core code combinations task group is responsible for the maintenance of the core code combinations via the core code combinations maintenance process. The group is composed of other 40 core participating organizations representing a wide variety of stakeholders and is led by 4 multi-stakeholder co-chairs: Shannon Baber from UW Medicine, Lynn Franco from United Health Group, Heather Morgan from Aetna, and Erica Zendel from Relay Health. The task group's maintenance efforts are year-round, so there is always plenty of opportunity to get involved and contribute to the task group's work. Recently, the task group completed a compliance-based review in response to the updated CARC and MARC lists that were published on July 1st, and the updated version of the core code combinations, including the task group approved adjustments, was published earlier today, October 4th. Next month, the task group will launch its third and final compliance-based review of the year in response to codeless adjustments that are expected to be published on November 1st. Additionally, CAQH Core will launch the 2016 Potential Market-Based Adjustments Industry Survey. This annual survey provides the industry with an opportunity to submit potential changes to the core code combinations for task group consideration. This is a 60-day response period, so we encourage you to consider submitting a response to the survey, and do feel free to contact us with any questions about the survey or the process. The next few slides provide examples of some of the industry-driven adjustments to the code combinations that the task group has recently approved and illustrate the real-world impact. As Bob noted, the goal of the code combinations and the associated maintenance process is to improve the denial management process, and these examples illustrate how they do just that. Slide 13 provides an example of an industry-driven adjustment to business scenario number 1, which addresses claim documentation. We see here the provider completing a service, submitting a claim for that service, and then receiving a claim denial. The denial includes CARC 163, which identifies that an attachment or other documentation referenced on the claim was not received. Previously, the payer could have included CARC N679, which would have specified that the issue with the claim documentation was due to an incomplete or invalid post-operative images or visual field results. However, this would be a mismatch as the WARC relates to a document that was not received, not a document that was invalid. Removing WARC N679 from the list of potential WARCs for association with CARC 163 ensures that providers get clearer and more accurate information about the reason for a claim denial and are therefore better able to quickly correct and resubmit a claim. On the next slide, we see an example of an adjustment to business scenario number 2, which addresses data within the claim. Again, we have the provider completing a service, submitting a claim for that service, and receiving a claim denial. In this instance, the denial received indicates that the prescription was incomplete via CARC 175, making marks N319, N378, N388, and N389 available for use with the CARC improves the message provided in the remittance device by specifying what data in the prescription is incomplete. For example, the hearing or vision prescription date or the prescription number. Addition of these WARCs mitigates the need for phone calls or other follow-up from the provider staff to determine what additional prescription data is needed to correct the claim. Continuing in this theme, slide 15 illustrates an example of a task group approved adjustment to business scenario number 3, which addresses non-covered services. Again, the provider completes the service, submits the claim, and receives a denial. In this instance, the denial includes CARC 49, indicating that the service is non-covered because it is a routine or prevent exam or a diagnostic screening procedure done in conjunction with such an exam. Including ROCs M90 and N129 for use with the CARC specifies that the non-covered service determination is based on frequency. Addition of the two ROCs prevents manual follow-up from provider staff to obtain information on the denial rationale. And finally, slide 16 illustrates another example of a task group approved adjustment to business scenario number 3. This situation identifies a claim with a secondary payer. The provider completes the service, submits the claim, and receives the denial, which includes CARC 22, specifying that the service should be covered by another payer per coordination of benefits. Including ROC N376 for use with the CARC clarifies that TRICARE is the secondary payer. This enables the provider to resubmit the claim to TRICARE, ensuring proper electronic secondary billing. Each of these examples illustrates the value of the code combinations to improve denial management and the importance of industry feedback to ensure the code combinations offer the most value. So again, please take advantage of the upcoming opportunity to submit your organization's feedback via the Industry Potential Adjustment Survey. And now I will hand the call to Drew Boytel to launch our first polling question.
Thank you very much, Omni. And this will bring us to our first of 2 polling questions that we have for the audience today. And how this will work is I will read the polling question you see here, and then on your screen you will see a window pop up, which you can use to log your response. So this question asks, approximately what % of your remittance advices in the past year included a situation addressed by the core defined business scenarios? And I will launch that poll, and you should see it on your screen. So go ahead and select your response, and I'll share the results after just a few seconds. And I might have Bob or Omni just to comment briefly on the results that we get. So take just a few minutes. A few seconds. Take about 5 more seconds, log your results, and I will share with the rest of the group. Take about 2 more seconds, and I'll share the results. Here we go. So it looks like Bob, biggest percentage, 40% here say that they're uncertain, followed by 19% indicating about 26 to 50% of the time, 17, 76 to 100%, kind of a little bit evenly scattered. What do you make of these results?
Well, I think it's a pretty positive indication that the core operating rules, specifically for the business scenarios for CARCs and LARCs, about 60% of the remittance advice for the folks that took the poll are impacted by what the work effort that the core task group undertakes in maintaining those code combinations. So it's pretty impactful to providers and to health plans as they develop maintenance processes, as they maintain those codes and those code combinations and those business scenarios. It's very important for them. So we want to make sure that we continue to do a good job at our end, as well as make sure that we meet the business needs moving forward too.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. Well, I would like to now introduce our 2 guest speakers from Anthem. First, I'd like to introduce Meg Cutts, who is a senior business consultant at Anthem and a subject matter expert on the 835 ERA compliance, and a representative for the respective industry work groups. Meg has 22 years experience with Anthem, 14 years in her current role, and before that, 8 years as a claims processor and analyst. Our second speaker from Anthem is Scott Munich, who is a business consultant at Anthem and is the 835 ERA governance program lead. Scott has been with Anthem for 2 years, all within the governance program. Prior to Anthem, he spent 12 years in the electronic manufacturing and services industry as an engineer and project and program manager. Welcome, Meg and Scott, and feel free to begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you very much. This is Meg. My email, the reason why it says Margaret out there is it's formal, Margaret. It used to be Margaret.Barber or Margaret Barber. Folks would know me in the industry under the name Barber. My name just changed recently. If you want to continue, we'll just get right into the slides. So I'm hoping that most folks are familiar with Anthem Incorporated. Prior name would have been WellPoint. We do have business in 20 different states, and as you can see by this slide, it's a significant amount of business. Different types of products ranging from Medicaid, Medicare, FEP business, dental, different types of nuances, ASO, TPA business. I gave a snapshot of our 2015 data on here so you can understand our volume of ERAs and EFTs that were realized in 2015. We're still in the process of collecting 2016 data. So if you want to continue to the next slide. So this is our landscape at this time. We are obviously involved in a lot of the different industry organizations, HL7, NPAG, WEDI. We're very active participants in X12. So we have different individuals in our organization that do participate in those areas which are working on some of the new transactions that are coming up. But specifically, we're here today to talk mostly about the 835. As you can see, though, we do support all the different adopted mandated transactions, and we do have our core seal for CAQH Phase 1 and 2, and we will be pursuing the certification for the third set of rules. So if you want to move forward. So where we were before the core code combinations. So prior to the mandate coming out, which talks about all different facets of E35 and obviously EFT rules involved in there, we were doing those 3 times a year updates based on the WPC publication. With CAQH core coming out with the code combinations, we definitely saw that as a benefit because prior to all of that, we did hear industry chatter about nothing was consistent. Folks were using the same code different ways. A lot of the provider organizations had been asking in the past for a publication of our proprietary mapping code to the HIPAA ANSI code combination because, again, there was no standard or realization of really how the codes were supposed to be used because, obviously when you just read a code, you can have 5 different people read it and they can have 5 different responses. But the code combination mandate really, I believe, helped the industry, and this was a good catalyst for us to get a little bit more organized. So prior to, again, that goes with the lack of the standard maintenance process. So prior to that, we didn't have any type of, well, we did have a maintenance process per se, but it really didn't bring all of the different subparts of the Anthem organization together as a whole. We had multiple functional areas that worked in silos. So if you can understand, we have different types of products and mandates and state and federal regulations. All of those different areas have been working in silos and working towards what they construed to be compliance, which it was. However, we didn't have everybody talking to each other. So we were all consistently doing the same thing. And we also, having everybody work in silos then fosters an environment where you don't have an effective way to audit and to monitor. And then ultimately that does lead to provider dissatisfaction and associated risk. So again, it goes back to the consistency, and everybody interpreting the codes hopefully in the same manner or utilizing them hopefully in the same manner. So that's your industry ideal to get to that consistent standpoint. So if you want to continue on to the next slide. Where we are now. This has been a a work in progress, and I think it will be a continual work in progress as we adapt and adjust to the different industry mandates that come out, state mandates, federal, ever-changing government changes that occur. But we have now what we feel is a corporate standard for 835 electronic remittance advice mapping. We have new policies and procedures that are in place that help support that and have been approved by our senior leadership. We also have clear direction and published definition within our organization. We do foster that quorum for cross-functional assessment. So we have, and you'll hear this more in the rest of the slides when we go into our governance process, but we ensure that we have the appropriate people reviewing, regardless of whether it impacts them or not, and this ensures consistency, and we have a voting process. Somewhat similar, I guess you would say, to when CAQH Core does their publication review updates based on the WPC publication. We have a quorum, we vote. We make sure that all questions are answered. We make sure we bring in the appropriate folks to ensure that those issues are addressed. And we also have a systematic decision process making, a framework, and you'll see that again in our governance process. We have developed a centralized database, so it's one-stop shopping. Again, this is a process that was stood up with the intention, you know, with the mandate that came out on 1/1/2014. We had been working on this governance process prior to that, and it's been evolving and building, and as we bring more people into the fold in our organization, this database just grows, and we keep on adopting and adding. We have a more efficient way to do audits and metrics to monitor our effectiveness. So basically what that means is if we needed to go in and find out how many things or how many different codes or how many different volumes of messages are we sending out that are related to, say, medical necessity, we have access to do that now. We didn't have access to do that before. Again, that goes back to the silos. Everybody was maintaining their own databases, if you will. It could have been tables, it could have been, you know, internal processes. Now our governance process has a snapshot of what everybody's doing. We are the, if you will, the traffic cop, the police that governs what everybody's doing. They still can maintain their own databases and tables. However, we have that database which we have audit teams that can come in and look into our database and then go out and make sure that what the system said they were going to be doing are what they're doing. Are we sending out the door what we said we were going to be sending out the door based on this project, this SSC, this small system change, or this initiative? Additionally, it gives us an opportunity to look at, do we have provider satisfaction? Meaning, do we have in our database looking at the code mapping and looking at what that code, the internal code means, is it consistent with what we're sending out the door? Does it give the provider what they need in order to auto-post or provide us with the necessary information? We can use that against what we're receiving for call volume. We can look at historical data to see, okay, well, it was mapped to this before, but now it's mapped to this now. So if you want to go to the next slide. And Scott, I believe this might be where you pick up. So I'm going to...
Yes, it is.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Meg. I'm going to take the next couple slides, and as Meg mentioned in the previous slide, she talked about the framework for systematic decision-making and that quorum for cross-functional assessment. And here on this slide, we've highlighted the 3 key roles within this framework. And I'll show in a couple slides how each of these roles fit into the overall governance process. But first, I want to just give a quick overview of what each of these 3 roles are. The first one being the Stewardship Committee, or SC as we refer to it. The Stewardship Committee is comprised of key stakeholders at the manager and director level within Anthem. These stakeholders each have a vested interest in communicating consistent and uniform messaging to our providers. We have members within the committee from such areas as provider relations, network contracting, claims operations, e-solutions, and compliance, among others. The Stewardship Committee is really tasked with a Tier 2 or final decision on all code change requests, acting as a gating committee for all 835 ERA and 277 claim status code set changes, as well as other changes to proprietary provider remittance messaging. We do require approval from our Stewardship Committee prior to development, testing, and implementation of any of the code change requests. Many times the Stewardship Committee members will be the ones to commit resources to serve as information custodians to help in the decision-making process. And that leads me to the second role, which is the information custodians, or what we call ICs. The ICs are really one of the most important roles within the whole framework. And they're comprised of cross-functional process experts, business analysts, and other subject matter experts. The ICs are the key factor in the entire process, as they are usually the most knowledgeable and or own a certain portion of the business or technical process to help guide us to a solution or to that best, most consistent mapping that we're striving for. Traditionally, as Meg kind of described in the previous couple slides, these ICs would have all made decisions in silos within their own units, knowing only what they can affect. Now, within our new governance framework and within the IC team structure, which I'll get into in the next slide, EDI and eSolutions partners with all of the parties involved to gain an end-to-end view, analysis, and ultimately consensus on decisions. Within our governance framework, ICs are asked to do the Tier 1 mapping recommendation based on the knowledge and research as a whole. So the information custodians are that first layer of decision making, and then Stewardship Committee is the second layer. And I'll get into that more in the next couple slides as well. The third role that I want to highlight is the governance lead, and this is the role that I serve at the time. And this is a role that is led by our eSolutions group. The governance lead is responsible for basically the general oversight and management of the entire governance process. The role consists of assisting with identifying the appropriate resources in order to form the IC teams, communications amongst the team and various stakeholders, also with facilitating cross-functional meetings between requesters, information custodians, and Stewardship Committee members, coordinating across initiatives to ensure there's no overlap or gaps, also ensuring that all deliverables are met, including monitoring the turnaround time on change requests, which is one of the key things that we do monitor. While we know we have really inserted ourselves as an additional step within the process for most of the groups, which can be perceived as a potential for delay in getting their changes implemented, it's important for us to recognize that and to monitor key metrics in order to strive to provide the best possible service for our requesters in order for them to meet their deadlines within their project. And finally, the governance lead will coordinate with the quality audit team with the post-implementation quality audits in order to do that monitoring and auditing that Meg spoke about. Okay, next slide, please. Here we have just a quick representation of the information custodian review team that I mentioned. I had stated, the information custodians are really responsible for that Tier 1 mapping recommendation. So they are really the key to the whole process. And we kind of have it structured with what we would call a core team, which is represented in the middle, and then an ad hoc team, which is represented in the outer ring, which would be pulled in, as necessary. Within the core team, we typically have a few members that are pulled in to do the review that are key to that process. The IC team, or the information custodian team, is always led by one of our eSolutions governance information custodians. And then we will usually engage a business analyst from within the line of business or specific area that the change request is affecting. And then we may also pull in another subject matter expert, such as a process expert related to that area. And that would typically make up the core information custodian review team. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that team does in the next slide. But then during the review, they may identify the need to pull in one of the ad hoc team members, another BA or subject matter expert from any one of the other areas that we've noted in this outer ring, such as a claims operations expert. We may have to reach out to pricing or to the eligibility and benefits area, medical policy or legal, claims IT we often have to reach out to. Sometimes we reach out to PE&C, which is provider engagement and contracting, as well as provider experience. And so here that just kind of illustrates, by bringing together all of the different areas to the table, we are ensuring that we have all of the right people at the table to make the decisions as a group. Okay, next slide. All right, this is just a high-level overview of the governance model that we've put in place, the framework that we've put in here. Starting at the top left, we can really start the governance process with really kind of three main, main starting points here. It could be that we have a new product or line of business that's launching that is requiring new disposition codes, new mappings. It could be a current project change request, or it could be resulting from one of the WPC or CAQH core publications that is changing mapping. Once we've identified the need for the change, whoever the requester is that's driving that change would come to our governance application and place an intake request. Our governance application is an online web-based tool. It's meant to be very user-friendly, and it's governed by the different roles that we mentioned. We have the requester, the information custodians, and the stewardship committee members all built in within the application. Once we receive that intake request, that then flows into the application to our eSolutions governance IC members. One of our IC members will pick up that request, and they will form their team as necessary, and they will perform that review. We kind of have a three-headed goal during our governance review that we like to communicate, and that is that during our review, our goal is to ensure we're providing accurate, compliant, and consistent mapping. And to do that, in their review, they may be working with those business analysts and subject matter experts to potentially review claims examples to understand how those claims and mappings are behaving today. They may be reviewing similar projects within the governance database that may be affecting similar codes, trying to, again, drive that consistency. Or they may be reviewing other documentation that may be out there that, or medical policy that may drive the meaning of the code. Once they've completed their review and made their recommendation, they're then going to hand it off to the governance lead for review. And I'm liking that to just a discount double check. It's just a real quick high-level review just to check again for those three things: that accurate, compliant, and consistent mapping. Then once the governance lead has provided their review, they would schedule it for governance stewardship committee voting. Currently, our voting period runs on a weekly time schedule. Typically, the voting window is open from Monday through Wednesday. If at any time during that period our stewardship committee members have any questions on the code change requests, they can submit a vote to request more information, and at that time the governance IC member would be notified, and they would work with either the team or the requester to get those questions answered. If by the end of the voting period the questions haven't all been resolved, we then have a cross-functional meeting that the governance lead facilitates between the governance stewardship committee, the ICs, and the requesters to resolve those unanswered questions and hopefully get us to an approved mapping. Once we have an approval on the code change request, it is then communicated automatically back to the requester that they have the approval, and then it's the responsibility of that requester to work with their project team and or business and IT teams to do the appropriate testing to ensure the positive results. Many times, if it's a larger project, governance will also review those testing results to ensure that the results align with the approval that was given. Once testing is completed, it goes through the normal implementation cycle and then back to the governance application for one final step to finalize that change request to what we call the baseline. And that is in order to align our standards database to what was implemented into the adjudication system. Megan mentioned that we implemented that standards database, and that is one of the two main functions of our governance application. One being that structured framework to provide that approval process and review process, and two, to be that one-stop shop for the standards for anyone to come and review exactly what is mapped for us for a particular code. And then the final step in the governance model is the post-implementation quality audits that are key to validating those changes after they're implemented and ensuring a quality implementation. Back to you, Meg.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So this next slide is going to talk about some of the benefits and challenges, and I know we've only got about another 15 minutes, so I'm going to move through this somewhat quickly, just going to call out some specific items. Obviously, I said before, there's the positive benefits. As you can see from what Scott presented, it's very detailed, and it goes through a lot of information, and we make sure we're dotting our I's and we're crossing our T's before we implement things. And this tiered process has proven itself, I can't even begin to tell you, over and over again, because we've caught stuff right up to the last hour, but it's because of the amount of people that we have on the call and because of the commitment and dedication. We did have some pushback, which was a challenge. Not necessarily pushback, but we had more of challenges and culture changes to say, you know, we have to have this and this can only make us stronger, and now people absolutely love it. Well, we tried to get some information about the benefits of it. Have we seen greater adoption, 35 and EFT enrollment increase? We definitely have seen an adoption rate of that. However, because we don't capture why are you signing up for EFT ERA today, we can't necessarily attribute it to any specific thing. It could be a compilation of now we have the opportunity to do electronic enrollment, which is always a benefit. Providers are enrolling more and more of their different pieces and parts of their organization. And it could be because, hey, you know what, I was this small guy before, and now I have the ability to auto post, and I've updated my system. It's not so antiquated, and we're seeing more providers are becoming more mature in the process. And I can tell you that these guys, from 2 years ago to today, I work with a lot of the different provider organizations, and I'm on calls. I see them in the industry meetings, and they really are scrutinizing the 835s now. So we're hearing a lot more chatter in the industry versus before. A lot of folks weren't really familiar with it. Managing project, I'm going to switch over to challenges. Managing competing projects is always a challenge. Everybody's in the same space. They all want to play in the sandbox together, but they don't realize they're in there together, and that's where this governance process comes into play. We've definitely had where 2 different areas wanted to use the same thing but in a different way, if that makes sense, and we saw that and we put a stop to it, and we were able to separate those out. So this governance process has served as highly beneficial for managing interdependencies. Real-time data usage is also a challenge. While our governance database does maintain historical data, it's only historical data from the moment in time when we stood it up, which was a couple of years ago. So if we've made a change to a code, it used to be mapped to this before, and now it's mapped to that, or the liability has changed, or you know, it could have been various different things. We do capture that information, but it's only from that snapshot in time. And some of the areas where the data, the real-time data is housed, where we're asked by CAQH Core or by WPC or by different organizations, how are you using this? What's your utilization effort? It sometimes is difficult because these things at times take IT support, which costs money. So sometimes real-time data can be a challenge. End-to-end testing, we are still always trying to improve upon that. We've definitely come a longer way now that 835 is in everybody's space. Everybody knows about 835. It's not what I always like to call the Pandora's box, so to speak, or the elephant in the room. People are learning more about it, and it's not just EDI. Now it's in our different respective adjudications system space. Again, we still continue to see interpretation of the codes themselves, the ANSI codes themselves, and I think until we evolve more and maybe update more of those code definitions, and that would be through the codes work groups, that'll still continue to be a problem. However, it seems to be less of a problem because of these 360 rules. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Where we aim to be in the future. We are currently in process of looking into using this governance model for different code sets and also different edits that we execute internally as well as on our external transactions. When we stood up the governance process, while it is 835 oriented right now, when we stood it up when the idea came about, it was never meant to be just 835 specific. It was always meant to be the 835 is our starting point, and it will be built out to be able to support any of the code sets and different transactions and any type of function where a governance model would be helpful in supporting the standard use and application. We're always continuing improving our testing. improving our regression database that's ever evolving. We will always have new stakeholder growth because as new products evolve, as we have an ever-changing industry, we will be expanding our stakeholder based on also our code set applications that we're going to be bringing in. And communicating, always working on that. It's always changing. We've gone out and done what we call our road shows within Anthem, so to get more people educated. And then we expect to do some automation work in the near future, so we don't have ourselves tied down to IT support, funding, things like that, the things that all payers and providers have a, I would say, a hate-hate relationship, that word funding or lack of funding. So you want to go on to the next page?
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Meg, and thank you, Scott, for such a great presentation. That is a tremendous effort that the two of you have just described, and we appreciate all the helpful hints and lessons learned that I think will help our audience as they try to get the most benefit from their denial management process. I'd like to ask, a couple of follow-up questions to Meg and Scott, and also, I may ask Bob and Omni to help me pitch into some of these questions. My first question is for you, Meg. You described in the beginning of your presentation kind of where you were before and, what you've done and where you're headed, but was there a particular event or particular, circumstance that kind of started this, quite, I say the word tremendous, but it's sort of a system-wide process? Or was there a champion, or what started all of this?
Well, definitely the rules mandate was a catalyst of it. I can say it was a compilation of a couple of different things. We understood about the diversity of the different products, but we did see definite inconsistency of use within our adjudication system in their mapping. And there was a lot of chatter with our provider organizations. We have ongoing meetings with them, and because of what I spoke about before, there was a demand to say, what, can you publish, because we don't understand different payers use different CARC and WARC codes. We took all of the feedback that we were receiving from our providers, from our help desk, as well as the different areas of lines of business, and we understood that this was highly beneficial to do this in order to promote adoption of the 835. So it was a combination of a couple of different things. I can tell you that probably the CAQH core, the mandate, the 360 rule, helped push that along because of the mandate aspect of it, because of the consistency.
Well, Meg, we always like to hear that the work that we do resonates across the industry. But given what you just said, how did you communicate all of these changes and, all that you were doing throughout your organization and to your providers?
Well, like I said, we had some culture change a little bit because we had a lot of folks working in silos. So we're such a large organization, how do you get to all of those folks? That's where our leadership committed and put together some really strong and solid documentation. Started at the top, went out and did what we call the road shows. Literally traveled to the different states where the different Anthem sites were located, met with the different respective leaders, got their support, and it was a trickle down. They jumped on board immediately. They loved the idea, and that was high level. And then from there, we developed into a more granular documentation and worked the kinks out of the flow, and it just progressed from there. We still do publish. We had I believe, Scott, you have some DBQs that were done, or databases where we've had training documentation that we did funnel out to folks.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
So it's a progression, and as we gain people and we have people move on from our organization, we'll always be in a cycle of communication.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, it sort of starts at the top, trickles, you know, to all your, you know, different offices, and that it's a continuous process. I think those are good best practices. So I wanted to change the subject a tiny bit. When you were talking about the challenges at the end of your presentation, Meg, when you were talking about the data access challenge you had, I wanted to pull the thread on that a little bit because it seems like a universal challenge. Could you think outside the box, you know, how do we remedy this need for real-time or historic data that I think plagues everybody who's listening to this webinar?
So I can tell you this, that the governance database has been, what we developed has been extremely beneficial to go in, and I utilized it last week for, I was at X12 and I utilized it for we were looking at one of the codes, the CARC codes, and we were wondering if it was really used in the industry. Our database allows us to search by CARC code specifically, and then I can go out there and say, okay, how many different messages are we sending out or we're using within the adjudication system that relate to this CARC code, and then I can go back and we can pull those internal proprietary codes, because we do have internal proprietary codes that they crosswalk from. And then from there, we had another database that actually accessed that system to give me real-time numbers. So, and again, it's only for a short period of time, but I can tell you that in our database, we capture the internal proprietary code, we capture the CAQH and RORC mapping, we capture all of the trigger logic, we can do keyword searches on specific name or specific words. We also do capture the core business scenario. So if we wanted to know, like that actual question, that polling question you asked, if we had, you know, if we had time, we could have gone into our database and we could have said how many. We can't tell you how many claims are using it that quickly, but we certainly can tell you how many proprietary codes that we have crosswalked to it or that apply to that business scenario. Additionally, we drill it down one more time from there, and this gets into the real-world data usage. We actually segment our database out by 8 different further benefit categories or business categories: medical necessity, COB, eligibility. There's 8 different categories that we drill down even further on. So that's where that real-world data can come in, so you can understand, how am I using this? You know, do I need to pull all of the things that are related to duplicate and see how I'm messaging those out? So that's what's helped us get to real-world data.
That's really helpful. And now to kind of finish off this segment of our webinar, I wanted to ask Omni a question. You know, this audience is very interested in this topic. Are there ways for them to engage with us on denial management?
Absolutely, Jessica. And I think it's great that Meg really spoke to real-world data and accessing the real-world data. I want to highlight again the industry survey that will be launching from November to I think mid-January is about the time frame. That is an opportunity to look at your real-world data, look at our core code combinations, and identify areas where the code combinations do not touch on maybe an individual business need that you're having. So perhaps there's a RORC that you are using quite a bit to that you think would be useful to identify, you know, a non-covered service or something, and you want us to incorporate that into the code combinations. So definitely take a look at that data and do complete the survey and ask, you know, send us an email if you have any questions. Additionally, the core code combinations task group are always looking for new members, and any core participating entity can join the task group. So feel free to get involved in CAQH core, become a participating organization, and feel free to let us know if you have any questions around that.
Thank you, Omni, and again, thank you so much to Meg and Scott and Omni and Bob for your presentations and for having this dialogue with us. We probably have only about enough time to ask one question. If you have any others, please send them in and we'll respond in a different manner directly to you if we can't get to you today. So let's see. So Magda, I think this is a good question for you to answer. I think it's just a little bit of misinformation. You know, does this apply across all the Blues, or is this just applied to Anthem and its affiliates or and its offices? Meg? I think you might be on mute.
I am on mute. I'm sorry. No, it applies to all Anthem, all of Anthem. We have several Blues plans that are enveloped under Anthem, but this applies, this governance process. We have 20 different states, and this applies. This is the governance process that we utilize for all of our Blues plans.
Thank you, Meg. And we've got one more question, and I'm going to, I think this one's one for Bob or for Omni. The question is the core code data map available for providers to review or download?
Absolutely. It is the core code combinations. It's available online at core at the CAQH.org with the core section of the website. There is, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to mention this, there is a code combination specific section of the CAQH core website. It has a link to the code combinations, current versions, past versions, guidance on implementation, guidance on compliance requirements. So that's definitely a great resource, and it's all online.
And I'm going to do one more for you, Bob, just because it's a really important question. And here it is. We know that these operating rules, phases 1 through 3, are mandated, but what happens if the mandates aren't followed? Is there a fine or?
That's a really good question. And actually, you know, all HIPAA-covered entities are required to implement the operating rules, you know, if they're conducting the transaction. So as a health plan or as a provider or clearinghouse software vendor, if you have an application that generates the remittance advice, that should be following not only the standard itself, but also the operating rules. And those are mandated for phases 1, 2, and 3. So it does include the 835 and the EFT transaction. Both are HIPAA-covered transactions and should be implementing an entity should be implementing the operating rules that govern those transactions as well. So those are required.
Thank you, Bob. So we are over time, so I want to thank you all for bearing with us, and hope this information was helpful. This slide has some information about a CAQH product that may be helpful. On the next slide are some links and ways to engage with us. Also, here are some of our upcoming webinars, as well as on the next slide, some of our educational resources. And thank you for your time. See you next time. Bye-bye.